Okay, we've heard from the 50s and the 90s, and now we're going to split the difference here, and we have a number of people from the 70s and 80s who are going to come up. And we're going to start with Gene Logusch. Gene, from the 1970s.
So I did 9 years at Columbia. I was an undergrad here, and I came here from a high school on the other side of Central Park, Regis High School, where students like myself, who were sons of immigrants, had a chance to have a tuition-free education. And a number of us came to Columbia in the fall of 1970. 1970, second year of riots after 1968 on the Columbia campus, a time of tremendous upheaval in our country. I remember myself as a high school student going out into Central Park to demonstrate against the war in Vietnam. So I came to Columbia very much with the intention of being a pre-med. In fact, the three people that had the greatest influence in my life as teachers were, first of all, Brother Norbert in grammar school, who saved me from being a New York street kid who really didn't like public school, didn't like being in class with girls, and didn't like women teachers, to show me sort of the right way to go. He was very much a believer in spare the rod and spoil the child. And in my case, he certainly caught my attention. After Regis and coming to Columbia, I went through the whole sequence that we had for a chemistry major. My very first class in Havemeyer Hall, where we sat today, or now to be called Gilbert Stork Hall, was taught by Ronald Breslow. Imagine that, Ronald Breslow teaching general chemistry. I sat there most of the semester with my mouth open. I couldn't believe this man's erudition. I couldn't believe his grace. I couldn't believe his passion for chemistry. And I thought this was not like any high school teacher, I'd ever seen. My physics teacher was Professor Malvin Ruderman. He was involved in astrophysics. He was a collaborator in the first discovery of Cygnus X1, the first X-ray source that we now know to be a black hole. And he went on and on about that when we were studying about gravity and Newton's laws. And I thought, wow, this is not Regis anymore, and this is not grammar school. Second year, I had general organic chemistry, and organic chemistry for majors. So my first professor in the fall was Nick Turo. Cannot even begin. Everybody says, RD made great drawings on the board. We see how Gilbert draws, he's very artistic. First man I ever saw use colored chalk, Nick Turo. And his descriptions of organic reaction mechanisms, I had thought that being a pre-med and learning organic chemistry would just be this nightmare of memorizing incomprehensible name reactions. And he made it all perfectly clear. Positive attracts negative. That's how you understand reaction mechanisms. You just have to keep in mind the hybridization state and so forth. And in the spring, sitting in that corner room, which I don't even know what they do with it now, but it's the corner classroom that was closest to Low Library, Gilbert taught us organic chemistry. And I remember sitting there thinking, who is this man? What is this? This is not even chemistry, this is art. This is logic. This is, well, and he'd come in sometimes with crumpled notes like we heard earlier today, and nevertheless, he was never disheveled, he was never disorganized, and he was quite generous, giving points, on tests, always encouraging us instead of trying, I guess, to discourage us and drive us away. So I persisted in being a chemistry major. I applied to MD, PhD programs. I, in fact, planned to go into the MD, PhD program at Columbia. And in my last year, I did some undergrad research with Charlie Cantor. And we had a lot of conversations, and he said, you know, do you really want to go to medical school? Why don't you just become a researcher? This is what you seem to be drawn to. And I had a lot of conversations with him about what I should do, and he asked me, well, what do you like the most? And I said, I have to be honest with you, it's organic chemistry. He said, well, then maybe you should just find some, you know, just talk to the dean at the medical school and have some worthy person who was on the waiting list get in for the MD, and then go talk to Gilbert. So I came to him and I talked to him in the summer. This was the summer of '74, and he said, yeah, we can arrange for this, but there's one catch. So the catch was that, I don't know how many of you remember, there was a fire in Ronald Breslow's lab in the summer of '74. And so all of the broken windows and the broken window frames were piled up in a hood. This was the big lab across from his office. And it was this hood overlooking Broadway, beautiful scenery. And Gilbert said, this will be, you know, your bench and your hood. Of course, after you clean it up. And I said, okay. So that was my first exposure. I think I got a couple of glass cuts, but eventually I got all of that stuff hauled out and disposed of. And another person who made a difference in my life was Dr. Janak Singh. I had not done undergrad research in chemistry. And Janak always took the time, no matter what he was doing, to help me and to show me the kind of how to get started and what to do. And I soon discovered that this was pretty much the MO of everybody in the group, including the boss. My second year in graduate school, I was the head of all the TAs in the organic lab, and my father came down with cancer. And I very much was involved in his treatment. And Gilbert said, you know, you're a hardworking person. You have done very well as a student. I'm sure that eventually when you get through this, you'll do well and you'll finish the project that you're going to be working on. That also made a difference in my life. A couple of sayings that I remember in the Julius Miller room when we used to do group meetings was somebody had floundered around for a long time on a project and finally figured out after doing a little library research the correct way out of this thicket. And Gilbert always let us do these kinds of things to enhance our learning. And I remember he said, you know, 6 months in the lab can save you a weekend in the library. And I have never forgotten that particular witticism that he gave us. I remember when I defended my thesis, he said, you are now ready to be a student for the rest of your life. And that was again something that sank in for me. I've done many things, but currently I'm a high school teacher. I've actually taught high school chemistry and physics of all things, for the last 18 years. We live in a very challenging age in terms of our youth. All of the remarkable things we've seen today in terms of science really rely on a pipeline of students to carry them out. It's hard to fill that pipeline with students who can think, with students who can concentrate, with students who are awash in information and yet have great difficulty sometimes and need to be taught how to distinguish good information from trash. And finally, I'd leave you with a thought, which is kind of what I teach them at the beginning of every class that I have, and that is, what is science? Really, what do we want to convey to our youth, whether they're in high school or whether they're in college or in graduate school? And so what I teach them is something I very much believe, based on everything I ever learned from Gilbert, is that the practice of science, number one, it is a practice. The practice of science is a systematic quest to satisfy human curiosity and experimentally ascertain truth about the physical universe. Truth today is a commodity in very short supply. We live in a world and in a society and even in our own nation where even the very facts and the very criteria by which to judge truth seem to be open to debate and to discussion. And so I try to teach both the parents and my fellow teachers, our administrators, and the students most of all, that if nothing else, we ourselves as scientists can pride ourselves, as Gilbert taught us, that science is a search for truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gene. So Gene was a lab mate of myself and Peter Bernstein back in the day, so great to see you again, Gene.